Good evening. My name is David Lee, and I am the Director of Education for the Dallas Historical Society. Founded in 1922, we collect, preserve, and exhibit the heritage of Dallas and Texas to educate and inspire present and future generations. For more information about the Dallas Historical Society and upcoming programs, please visit dallashistory.org. Educators, please sign the attendance form in the lobby and pick up your certificate after the lecture if you want CPE credit. 80 years ago today, Allied land, air, and sea forces launched the largest amphibious invasion in human history on the beaches of Normandy, France. Almost 12,000 aircraft supported the effort. Few realize that many of these planes were built in Dallas, and thousands of World War II pilots learned to fly in planes constructed here. Welcome to an evening with Dr. Terrance Furgerson. Dr. Furgerson is a professor of history at Collin College near Dallas, Texas. He holds a doctorate from the University of North Texas, concentrating on American military history. While pursuing his graduate studies, he became aware of the Texas operations of North American Aviation, initiating research into the creation and operation of this unheralded factory. Please join me in welcoming him to the Dallas Historical Society to discuss the Dallas story, the North American Aviation plant, and industrial mobilization during World War II.
All right, well, good evening. Thanks for coming. It's a bit intimidating, this many people. My wife, who's here today, said, you talk to people all the time. I said, yeah, but they're freshmen taking a survey class they don't want to take, so they're probably not actually paying attention, and I'm the best educated person in the room. Now there's people who are actually interested in history, and they might catch me making a mistake, and some of them are probably better educated than I am, so it's a little bit intimidating. But as I told some friends yesterday, it's a free show, so you get what you pay for. So I envision this in three parts. This is the casual part where I try to kind of break the ice by just kind of ratchet jawing for a minute. Then I have some prepared remarks. It'd be a lot more fun to just talk randomly off the top of my head. The problem is this is a 5-year story and I have about 40 minutes. So it'd be real easy to go off on a tangent or fall down a rabbit hole and miss something. So the prepared remarks are kind of to force me to stay on task and not go chasing squirrels. And then at the end, there'll be time for some Q&A, which will be, obviously unscripted. So I'm going to start by the Dallas story. It seems like an odd title for a book, and it's because of this advertisement, which was in national magazines back at the time. So how could you not want to call your book The Dallas Story when you can show this ad from Life magazine? I'm going to play you a little bit of an audio tape. Yeah, it's on 8-track. No, I'm going to show you. I'm going to play a little bit of an audio. It's kind of not the highest quality in the world. I'm not going to make you suffer for a whole lot of it, but it kind of sets the feel for what's going to happen, and I think you can pick out enough stuff, and there's a reason why I wanted to play this, which will become obvious to you in about probably 90 seconds or so. So let's see if I can make this thing work. I'm a bit of a Luddite, so.
Today, the great plant of North American Aviation Incorporated joins forces with the other aeroplane factories of the nation, thus bringing a little closer to completion the network of national defense projects, the armaments needed for complete national preparedness. Through the facilities of WRR in Dallas, the Special Events Department of the Mutual Network has placed a barrage of microphones on the speaker's platform in one of the large hangars in order that you may hear the ceremonies attendant to today's formal opening. This North American Aviation plant is located in Grand Prairie, Texas, just on the outskirts of Dallas. Yesterday was open house, and 60,000 people were conducted through the vast expanse of this most modern defense unit. The crowd was all-American, and interest ran high. And it was an interest that didn't start yesterday, and neither did it stop. It started way back when the United States first began to plan a defense program. Your right, our part of the nation, is just like yours.
It's all American, and it was only natural that yesterday's thousands should feel and show a great pride as they witnessed this magnificent stone and steel guardian of America's liberty. We have seen these acres of black land where King Cotton fought the boll weevil change almost miraculously into a great wall of shining defensive armor that will stand between this land of liberty and dictatorship. From the four corners of the nation have come these materials that men have molded into an American monument, not merely a lifeless monument built in memory of, but one that was built and which will be dedicated today to the future safety of America's freedom. It's a monument that lives and produces implements for the protection of construction, not implements built for the purpose of destruction. Now to the formal ceremonies, which are opened with the playing of our national anthem.
I'll skip the national anthem. I'm sure you've all heard that. Now, why did I want to? I don't know how well you could hear that. I know what it says because I listened to it many times when I was transcribing it. But I wanted to play this for a reason because I got this from the Dallas Historical Society. Yeah. So I went and found this little clipping here to add. The recordings of the plant grand opening were given, as you can see here, to G.B. Dealey. Gosh, that name rings a bell. By James Howard Kindleberger, the head of North American Aviation. So when I was doing the research for this found that these discs had been sitting here in this building probably since 1941, and probably no one had listened to them since 1941 because they're in an obsolete 16-inch special format. So I wanted to play those for you, partially because courtesy of the Dallas Historical Society. All right. So I got some prepared remarks here. And I blew the font up, so I should be able to see. So during World War II, can you hear me okay? Is that better? Okay. Too bad, too loud? During World War II, American industry produced a multitude and variety of weapons from factories across the United States. Some of these factories are well known, notably the Ford Willow Run aircraft plant in Michigan or the Kaiser shipyards in California. I'm here today to tell you about a plant located on the outskirts of Dallas, Texas. Operated by the North American Aviation Company, NAA, this factory is arguably the premier example of industrial mobilization. Yet the plant is largely forgotten, and its contributions to war effort are overlooked. How did Dallas, a city with no pre-existing aircraft manufacturing industry, become the location for an airplane factory? The answer begins with President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and the year 1938 offers a starting point for discussion. In his State of the Union address on 3rd of January, Roosevelt referred to, quote, a world of high tension and disorder. He stated, quote, we must keep ourselves adequately strong in self-defense, end quote. On 28th January, the president made recommendations to Congress. Roosevelt wanted greater funding for the Navy, 2 new battleships, ammunition for the Army, an increase in anti-aircraft materials, and more than $6 million to manufacture industrial tooling. Nothing was explicitly stated regarding aviation at this time. So here's the state of the aviation assets of the United States Army Air Corps in 1938. Not very impressive. Yeah. This was from a speech given by General Frank M. Andrews. I have a sneaking suspicion that Andrews Air Force Base might be named after this guy, but I've never actually looked it up. So we're not in real good shape. So the momentum for readiness accelerated after Germany annexed Austria in March of 1938. On 29th of April, presidential advisor Bernard Baruch, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, wrote a letter to Roosevelt. Baruch had been the head of the War Industries Board during World War I. He called for the acquisition of machinery to produce gunpowder, the manufacture of artillery, semi-automatic infantry rifles, and then quote, airplanes and more airplanes. White House files suggest an interest in military aviation during the middle of 1938, but air power was just one part of a readiness problem. An increased focus on aviation was brought about by the Czechoslovakian crisis in the autumn of 1938. After listening to a speech by Adolf Hitler on 12 September, Roosevelt ordered Harry L. Hopkins to, quote, go out to the Pacific coast and take a look at the aircraft industry with a view to its expansion for war production. At the end of September came the Munich Conference, which accelerated actions at the White House. William C. Bullitt, the United States ambassador to France, returned to Washington on 13th October and briefed Roosevelt. French officials believed that Hitler had been emboldened by his Air Force, backed by an industry capable of rapid expansion. According to historian Mark Watson, quote, President Roosevelt became convinced for the first time that American airplane production should be greatly stimulated and with all possible speed. The French believed that the Germans possessed a superior air force, and they took steps accordingly. France ordered 100 Curtiss H-75 fighters on 13th May 1938, with an option to purchase more. But were their concerns about the American aircraft industry well-founded? The French had legitimate fears, for they were substantiated by representatives of the American aviation industry who had visited European aircraft factories. These men grasped the implications of what they saw in the German factories they visited. One such visitor was Lawrence Bell of Bell Aircraft, who toured Germany, Italy, France, and Great Britain during the summer of 1938. On 12 September, the same day as the previously mentioned speech by Hitler, Bell submitted a confidential report describing his observations and ranking the capability of each country's aviation industry. Bell rated Germany as a 10, England as a 5, Italy as a 2, and France merely at 1. Germany, he estimated, produced 8,000 to 10,000 planes per year in modern, efficient factories. Bell's report described the European aviation industry. What about the United States? As previously mentioned, the President asked Harry Hopkins to investigate this in September. Hopkins apparently assigned the task to Major Alfred J. Lyon of the Army Air Corps, who responded with a memorandum on 3rd November 1938. Lyon listed 12 manufacturers of military aircraft with a large concentration in Southern California. Other manufacturers were based along the eastern seaboard. The industry was operating below capacity with an estimated 1,200 aircraft produced in 1938. Lyon calculated that existing facilities could produce 7,500 airplanes per year. To expand beyond that would require additional factories. But aviation companies would be hesitant to expend capital, building facilities that might be unneeded. If increased Army procurement proved to be short-term, the industry could find itself with expensive plants sitting idle. One possible answer was for the government to construct and operate aircraft factories. This would be a problem, as many firms depended on military orders to survive. If the government built its own aircraft, it could harm the aviation industry on which any major production program would depend. Plus, the government lacked experience in designing and manufacturing airplanes on a large scale. Around this time, we're still in fall of 1938, around this time, Roosevelt established an aircraft committee to study the problem. On 28th October, only 3 days after it was created, you mentioned the government doing anything in 3 days? Sorry, editorial comment. On 28th October, only 3 days after it was created, the group called for production capacity of 15,000 aircraft annually within 2 years. The committee also advocated the building of additional factories by the government capable of manufacturing 16,000 planes per year. A follow-up letter on 2nd November identified possible locations for plants, including the Dallas-Fort Worth area. In the weeks after the Munich conference, a variety of sources provided Roosevelt with information about military aviation. He called a meeting at the White House to discuss the situation. Held on 14th November, it was attended by Roosevelt, Hopkins, and members of the cabinet. Military officers were also present, including Army Chief of Staff Malin Craig, Deputy Chief George C. Marshall, and Henry H. Arnold of the Air Corps. Sources agree that Roosevelt controlled the conversation. Historian Mark Watson relates that the president did most of the speaking as if his mind had been made up by earlier discussion and appraisal. According to historian Irving B. Hawley Jr., Roosevelt did not ask for advice. He laid his positions on the line. Roosevelt wanted to dramatically increase the strength of the Air Corps. He desired an Army Air Force of 20,000 airplanes and an annual productive capacity of 24,000. There were political considerations, however. With the Depression ongoing and the isolationist sentiments common among Americans, Roosevelt requested a less ambitious goal. He wanted a program for 10,000 planes over a 2-year period, of which 8,000 would come from existing plants and 2,000 from new plants built with government funds. FDR also desired the creation of an unused plant capacity for producing 10,000 airplanes a year. The program called for the government to build 7 aircraft factories, of which 2 would go into operation. The remaining plants would be held in reserve. There were many things to consider when selecting locations for these plants. New factories should be far inland to provide protection against attack. But there were other requirements. Factories needed plentiful and reliable electric service. Railroad access would be useful for bringing in materials. An airfield would be necessary to fly out the finished aircraft, and moderate weather would help in that regard. Finally, there had to be an available pool of workers to operate the factory. All of these requirements were satisfied by Dallas, Texas. So, of course, the war breaks out on September 1st, 1939. As the calendar flips into 1940, the war in Europe was static. But in the spring, Hitler seized the initiative. The Germans attacked France, rapidly gaining the upper hand. On 15th of May, Winston Churchill received a call from his French counterpart, who lamented, "We have been defeated. We are beaten. We have lost the battle." A surprised Churchill promptly sent a communication to Roosevelt asking for American support to Great Britain. Churchill requested, quote, 40 or 50 of your older destroyers and several hundred of the latest types of aircraft. The success of the Germans was on Roosevelt's mind as he delivered an address to Congress on 16th May. He listed a number of military needs, but he emphasized aircraft, calling for an additional production capacity. He then requested previously unseen numbers. In November 1938, he had talked of 20,000 aircraft. Now Roosevelt wanted a program to provide 50,000 airplanes. Furthermore, he wanted an industrial capacity capable of producing 50,000 airplanes a year. Roosevelt wanted aircraft and aircraft factories. The question of what kinds of aircraft were unanswered. Also unknown was who would build them and where it would be done. In Texas, the members of the Dallas Chamber of Commerce were working to make their city part of the answer. Civic leaders had long been interested in bringing the aircraft industry to Dallas. In 1928, the city established an aviation plan after purchasing Love Field in 1927 for use as a municipal airport. The city also owned Hensley Field, which was leased to the United States Army. This airfield was visited by a congressional delegation on 13th November 1939 as part of a tour of Air Corps facilities. The visitors were greeted by leadership from the Dallas Chamber of Commerce. The businessmen presumably took the opportunity to advocate locating an aviation plant in Dallas. They probably found receptive ears, as Texas had friends in high places. United States Vice President John Nance Garner was a Texan, as was Sam Rayburn, the House Majority Leader. These efforts apparently bore fruit. The spring of 1940 brought visitors to Dallas from 2 aviation firms who were scouting locations for factories. On 18th of June, 1940, the directors of the Dallas Chamber of Commerce met to consider the situation. It had been just 4 weeks since FDR had issued his call for 50,000 airplanes, and mere days since representatives of Consolidated Aircraft had discussed their needs with the city government and the Chamber of Commerce. Ben Kritz, the vice president of the Chamber, believed that Consolidated was ready to come to Dallas if the city would meet the requirements. There were concerns the opportunity might be lost without quick, decisive action. In 2 days, the Chamber formulated a plan to buy the necessary land. 18 Dallas businessmen committed themselves to bringing the factory to Dallas, with or without cooperation from the city government. On July 5th, the Dallas Morning News featured a banner headline declaring $8 million plane factory employing 5,000 to be built here. It would be the largest single plant in Texas. The announcement was made in San Diego, California by Consolidated Aircraft and in Dallas by the Chamber of Commerce. Notice not the city, the Chamber of Commerce. But it turned out to be inaccurate news. The announced facility was never built due to decisions made by the federal government. For some time, federal officials had been contemplating how to finance expansion of the aviation industry. Now, with the president's call for 50,000 aircraft, the need to resolve this issue became paramount. Various concepts were explored, but the most important source of funding, and the one that eventually impacted Dallas, was the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC. Excuse me. There was a belief that the RFC could play a role in defense financing. Congress passed legislation allowing the RFC to lend money for defense plans, with the measure being signed by President Roosevelt on 25th June 1940. It's about 6 weeks after the fall of France. Well, 2 weeks after the fall of France. Anyway, France is gone. Having agreed to finance industrial expansion, the national government determined which facilities and companies received priority. With both Consolidated and the North American Aviation Company eyeing Dallas, it was necessary to choose. It appeared Consolidated held the upper hand, but executives at NAA wrote a series of letters to government officials to sway the decision in their favor, and North American was awarded the factory site. Once again, the newspapers announced the building of an airplane factory in Dallas, but this time the reports were accurate. On 17th August, the Daily Times Herald featured a front-page headline declaring Dallas gets big plane factory. The next day, the Dallas Morning News broke the news to its Sunday readers, announcing the impending construction of a North American factory next to Hensley Field. At this time, the exact method of financing the plan had yet to be finalized. Eventually, the costs were covered by the Defense Plant Corporation, the DPC, which was created on 22nd August 1940 as a subsidiary of the RFC. The DPC made a preliminary decision on 21st October when a lease agreement was authorized with North American Aviation. Formal action occurred on 14th November during a meeting of the DPC directors held in Washington. The DPC would be the actual owner of a factory, with NAA leasing the facility. The estimated startup cost was officially tabulated at $7,961,349. While the government sorted out details, construction was already underway. A groundbreaking ceremony was held on 28 September. A general contractor was announced on 1st November, with work scheduled to begin within 2 weeks. The construction team struggled against torrential rains in November, creating what one reporter called a mudkrieg. Despite this, work progressed. Concrete was poured in November, and upright steel started being put into place on 2nd December. By the end of the year, approximately 50% of the steel work had been completed on the main building as the factory started to rise from what had been cotton fields. Construction was finished ahead of schedule, and it was the first emergency plant to begin operation. This is the plan. I love laser pointers. So to give you an idea of the scale, here's the cars. This is the administration building. This is where the paper pushers push their papers. This is where you build airplanes. This is the hangar. And then there's other buildings too. The building of a plant was a significant event for the city. The major Dallas newspapers featured special sections on Sunday, 6 April 1941, with articles about North American, the factory, and the AT-6 trainer aircraft to be built there. Entire pages of advertisements welcomed the new business. To celebrate the occasion, North American held an open house for the public that day. Planners anticipated 25,000 people might attend the scheduled 4-hour event. Instead, there were that many on hand when the gates opened at 2 p.m. When the gates were finally closed at 7 o'clock, an estimated 60,000 people had toured the factory. The population of Dallas at the time was, I think, less than 400,000. Others listened at home to a live broadcast on local radio station KGKO. No one knew that the attack on Pearl Harbor was only 35 weeks away. Official dedication ceremonies took place the next day. Key executives from NAA were present, including Chairman of the Board Ernest R. Breach and Company President James Dutch Kindleberger. Okay. The Air Corps sent Major General George H. Brett, and William S. Knudsen represented the Office of Production Management. He was one of Roosevelt's dollar-a-year men. Texas Governor W. Leo Daniels served as the official host of the occasion. Among the guests were Dallas Mayor Woodall Rogers and Amon G. Carter of Fort Worth, who didn't usually like to come to Dallas, but he did for this. All right. The dignitaries gathered inside the plant for luncheon, then adjourned to the nearby aircraft hangar, here, where speeches would be given. Ernest Breach served as master of ceremonies, with Governor Daniel giving the opening remarks. Kindleberger, Brett, and Knudsen also spoke. Parts of the ceremony went out across the mutual broadcasting system, providing coverage of the event from coast to coast. The opening of the plant was a national story. After the speeches concluded, the proceedings moved to the flight ramp, where Brett accepted delivery of the first 3 Dallas-built AT-6 trainers. Oh, wrong button. Let's try that. Yeah. This is James Kindleberger. He is the president of North American Aviation. This is William Knudsen. He's the production guru, and there's General Brett. These are probably some of the pilots who would fly the planes away. After the speeches concluded, the proceedings moved to the flight ramp, where Brett accepted delivery of the first 3 Dallas-built AT-6 trainers. Army pilots manned the aircraft and took off from Hensley Field, returning to circle over the crowd. It had been 192 days since the groundbreaking ceremony, and the Texas Division of North American had delivered its first aircraft. It was just the beginning. On 24th July, the North American Board of Directors met in Dallas. They toured the plant and inspected the 100th aircraft produced there. This averages out to about 25 planes a month, and Dutch Kindleberger reported that the production was 2.5 months ahead of schedule. Plans called for 12,000 employees building 400 trainers a month, and the plant had orders totaling $108 million. Conditions in Dallas were apparently satisfactory, for major development came about 3 weeks later. On 15th August, the North American plant in Inglewood, California delivered its last AT-6, and the Dallas factory took full responsibility for producing the aircraft for the United States military. In less than a year, the North American plant had gone from being approved through construction and into production. Now, after 4 months of operation, the factory was the sole source for the essential AT-6 trainer. On the first day of September, the plant reached another milestone, completing the first aircraft assembled totally out of parts fabricated in-house. Initial planes had utilized components supplied by Inglewood, but from September forward, the Dallas factory was self-sufficient. Sunday, the 23rd of November, brought another achievement. In what was the largest single delivery to date in Dallas, 50 trainers were turned over to the military. It was 1 year since the first structural steel had arrived at the plant site, and less than 8 months since the first trainers had been delivered. The Texas Division of North American remained consistently and considerably ahead of contract schedule. But time was running out. 2 weeks later, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, And on 8th December, President Roosevelt spoke to Congress and the nation. In Dallas, North American workers gathered around radios to listen. The atmosphere was subdued, with one observer writing, quote, "Faces simply became a trifle grimmer, more set in determined lines." Some employees had personal stakes in the news from the Pacific. Cora Moore had a brother-in-law stationed at Hickam Field in Honolulu. Dora Sandlin had relatives in the Philippines near Manila, which was now a war zone. One unnamed employee, easy for me to say, one unnamed employee simply said, "Now we know what we've got to do." By the time the day shift went home, the United States was officially at war with Japan. The next day, the Dallas Morning News approached local defense industries to inquire about their status. A diesel engine factory in Garland was still under construction, but it was hoped that production could begin in February. Managers at the Southern Aircraft Company, also in Garland, anticipated going to a 24/7 schedule with plans to double the workforce. Officials at North American, however, offered no grand statement or details regarding specific plans. Their answer was short and to the point. We're going to build more airplanes. The entry of the United States into the war brought changes to the Dallas operations of North American as America moved into a full war footing. These changes came quickly. On 13th January, the Air Corps issued a letter of intent to North American stating that the War Department planned on ordering 750 four-engine B-24 bombers from the company. Dutch Kindleberger signed the letter on 15th January, putting North American on the path towards producing heavy bombers. What the letter of intent did not specify is where the bombers were to be built. The B-24 Liberator was a larger aircraft than anything North American was then producing, with a wingspan of 110 feet. While the existing factory buildings might have been able to accommodate the B-24, manufacturing processes were set up around the AT-6, or in Inglewood, the B-25. A massive rearrangement of assembly lines would be required, disrupting production during a critical period. The best solution to the problem was to construct a new facility to produce the B-24. The new plant could be built alongside an existing one, where the infrastructure was already in place. This would also allow the existing factory to support the new one during the startup process. This decision was almost certainly made before Kindleberger signed the letter of intent on 15th January. This is indicated by a War Department message dated 19th January, which referenced a proposal from North American concerning an expansion of the Dallas plant. The teletype stated North American planned to increase its manufacturing capacity in Dallas from 300 trainers a month to 400. More significantly, the company sought to attain additional capacity for manufacture of 75 B-24s per month. The estimated cost for the expansion project was $22,198,500. An additional 25,000 employees would be needed to handle the workload. Dallas thus received the assignment to build B-24 bombers in what was essentially a complete second factory, located only a few hundred feet to the west of the existing unit. This new facility was designated as the B plant, with the older operation becoming the A plant. Once construction was authorized, it was anticipated that the facility would be ready in approximately 200 days, with production beginning 15 days later. Delivery of the B-24 bombers could begin in early 1943, with peak production reached 580 days after approval of a project. Unlike the previous construction project, this time there was apparently no media coverage. The construction of B plant appears to have been the subject of a news blackout. There's no indication of a grand public dedication ceremony or open house or any of the celebratory occasions associated with the initial arrival of North American to Dallas. This might have been partly due to the pressing needs of the war effort, but the main reason was probably concern about security. Obviously, it was impossible to hide the building of a 1,200-foot by 650-foot structure from the thousands of employees who worked mere yards from the job site, nor from the nearby residents of Grand Prairie. But publicity of the plant was withheld from print sources that might have spread the news to areas outside the immediate vicinity, and details about the factory were presumably on a need-to-know basis. It was the closing days of 1942 before any information was released to the public. As far as production of the B-24 went, yes, we should. This is the T6 train, the AT6 trainer. This is the B-24. This is the P-51 Mustang. We'll get to that here in a few minutes. As far as the production of the B-24 went, Dallas reached a milestone when the first completed bomber rolled out for its maiden flight on 16th March 1943. This was 319 days since the production contract was signed. The olive drab aircraft featured the phrase, "More to come," printed on the side of its nose. With the first plane completed, it was publicly announced that the B plant was engaged in B-24 production. Up to that time, the exact model of bomber had been unreleased, but with a large plane outside the hangar and taking off from Hensley Field, it would have been difficult to keep it under wraps. And so Dallas openly joined the production of Liberator. The problem was there was no rush of Liberators rolling out of the door of the plant. The first ship promised more to come, but the reality was that the plant was not ready to enter full-scale production. There had been a series of delays, beginning with a failure of structural materials to arrive as scheduled. Equipment also arrived late, including hydraulic presses and machine shop fixtures. Contractors had difficulty hiring enough skilled labor, and there was a shortage of electrical power in the plant until additional transformers arrived. All these factors caused the B plant to be completed about 4 months later than scheduled. In the meantime, the first B-24 had been largely built in sub-assemblies in the hangar building of the A plant. While 1942 saw the building of the B plant, the coming of war also affected the A plant. North American had designed a new fighter aircraft known as the P-51 Mustang, and the Army wanted them in large numbers. North American needed to increase its production capacity for the aircraft. At the time, the Mustang was only built at Inglewood, California, and the desirability of a second source was obvious. According to North American records, the decision to manufacture the planes in Dallas was made in October 1942. Since the Texas facility was engaged in war production and owned by the federal government, official authorization was needed. On 14th December 1942, just a year after Pearl Harbor, a government teletype outlined the proposal to initiate P-51 production in the Dallas A plant. The usual parameters were taken into consideration, including the availability of labor, transportation, and utilities, all of which were considered adequate. There was concern over the availability of housing, which was deemed insufficient for the increased workforce, and it was stated that several hundred additional housing units would be required. August 1943 was the third anniversary of a public announcement of the North American plant coming to Dallas. The Chamber of Commerce celebrated the anniversary with a luncheon on 24th August with North American executives in attendance. Dutch Kindleberger spoke to the crowd. He praised the P-51 Mustang, which he called the world's best fighter plane at any altitude. The first Dallas-built versions designated the P-51C my place. The first Dallas-built versions designated the P-51C were preparing to roll off the assembly lines at this time, some 3 months later than forecast. The B-24 bomber was also behind schedule, but the kinks were being worked out of the process, and large numbers of both airplanes were scheduled for production. Kindleberger informed his audience that an additional 19,000 workers would be needed by 1st of January 1944. Furthermore, to retain that number, the company needed to hire 24,000 men to offset turnover. These new workers would need accommodations, and there were concerns about inadequate housing. These labor demands and an ongoing housing shortage strained the ability of the community to furnish the requested manpower, and this resulted in Dallas being declared a Group 1 critical labor area effective 1st October 1943. This triggered a flurry of activity as businessmen and politicians sought ways to address the situation. The declaration of Dallas as a critical labor area, along with lagging deliveries of B-24s and P-51s, brought attention from the Senate Special Committee to investigate the National Defense Program, also known as the Truman Committee. Members of the committee arrived on 9th October to explore the ongoing problems in Dallas. What resulted was 4 days of often contentious hearings during which North American workers expressed discontent and made accusations of weak management at North American. Company executives in turn offered explanations centered on design changes, supply shortages, and employee turnover. Government inefficiency was criticized as well, especially the failure to provide sufficient housing. There was plenty of blame to go around, but the basic common element was that the factory had expanded way beyond the original plan at an accelerated pace dictated by wartime pressure. Adjustments were made accordingly, with production schedules reduced and management increased. Other organizational changes were also made to improve efficiency of the plant and reduce the requirements for manpower. As 1944 dawned, the North American plant was emerging from the chaos of expansion, and 3 different models of aircraft were under production. AT-6 trainers, P-51 fighters, and B-24 bombers were all rolling off the assembly line. In the first 5 months of 1944, the factory delivered more than 2,400 aircraft, with 646 in the middle of May alone, a new record for the Texas operation. Production reached a new peak in July of 1944, and in August, 653 new airplanes flew out of Hensley Field for delivery. This brought deliveries to 4,370 aircraft for the first 8 months of the year. And the company proudly announced that the Texas division of North American, quote, has produced 1 out of every 15 airplanes built in the nation this year. But even as the plant was reaching new heights, a changing war situation pointed towards a reduced emphasis on the production of the B-24. The successful invasion of France in June 1944, why that would be today, suggested the war against Germany was entering the final stage, and American air superiority lessened the number of bombers lost in combat. Meanwhile, in the Pacific theater, the long-range B-29 bomber had emerged as the weapon of choice in the strategic bombing campaign against Japan. B-24s were still needed, but with 5 different plants producing the airplane, there was an excess of production capacity. As a result, North American schedule was reduced by hundreds of aircraft, with a halt to the program in October 1944, when the last B-24 rolled out of the B plant. Production of the AT-6 trainer and the P-51 fighter continued into 1945 at the A plant. Meanwhile, the B plant went into pre-production on a new cargo ship known as the C-82 Packet. It appeared that the North American factory would be busy until at least 1946, but events once again altered the situation. On 6 August 1945, the B-29 Superfortress dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, followed 3 days later by a second nuclear bombing against the city of Nagasaki. On 14th August, Japan notified the Allied powers of its desire to surrender. The news was announced by President Harry S. Truman at 6 p.m. Dallas time, and a festive air filled the city. Night shift workers at North American heard the news, cheered, sang the national anthem, and went home. The employees were given August 15th off as a holiday. As it happened, the majority would never return to work at the plant. On 15th August, the company announced that the government had terminated all aircraft contracts for Dallas. Workers were told not to come to work on 16th August, except for those working in administrative departments charged with processing payroll and activities related to the shutdown. Approximately 15,000 people had lost their jobs, either immediately or in the near future. The narrative had come full circle. The news that, forgot I had this phone. The narrative had come full circle. The news that North American was coming to Dallas had been officially announced on 17th August 1940. The notification of the plant shutdown occurred on 15th August, just 2 days short of 5 years later. What Dutch Kindleberger referred to as the Dallas story had effectively ended. Left behind were 2 quiet manufacturing facilities, thousands of people trained in industrial skills, and a production legacy calculated at 18,784 aircraft. This number represented the greatest output achieved by a single United States plant during the war years and was achieved by personnel who were typically inexperienced in such work prior to the conflict. The successful transition from planes to planes was a substantial accomplishment. But the North American plant was more than just a Dallas story. It was a national one as well. As the first factory constructed and financed by the Defense Plant Corporation, it represents a working partnership between the national government and private enterprise. This cooperation facilitated the pre-war enlargement of the American aviation industry into a manufacturing juggernaut that produced 295,959 aircraft during the period from July 1940 through August 1945. NAA Dallas played a significant role in this accomplishment. In the end, any historical evaluation of the Dallas North American plant must recognize these facts. The factory was the first of the emergency expansion facilities financed by the United States government, making it the prototype example of such a facility. It produced more aircraft than any other wartime factory, and it played a significant part in transforming the city of Dallas into an industrial center. Considering these facts together, it becomes clear that the story of North American Dallas is more than just a matter of state or local history. It is arguably the premier example of industrial mobilization for the famed arsenal of democracy, and is a story worthy of remembrance. So North American was the largest producer. If you count flyaway aircraft, they're the largest producer during the war. The Dallas plant was the largest of the North American plants. Now, if you go by airframe weight, some of the big bomber manufacturers like Boeing are ranked higher. So do you rank airplanes? Do you rank weight? So depends how you want to do it. So takeaways, I've already talked about this. Dallas was the first expansion plant to go into operation, achieving sustained production prior to Pearl Harbor. Well, I'm repeating myself here, so let's go on to the next one. This is really more than just a story about a factory building airplanes. It's the people of Dallas building airplanes in a factory. This is shift change at the plant. That's what the story is really about. There's a bunch of North Texans rolled up their sleeves and went to war, building aircraft. If you bought a war bond, you can get your picture taken with a P-51. There are probably hundreds of pictures in drawers scattered around the area of different workers in front of these airplanes.